Here's a fancy embroidery technique. This is Bullion Rose. Bullion roses are not difficult to make once you understand how they work. Now this Bullion Rose uses 2 colors of thread, but I'm going to show you here how to make a Bullion Rose that just uses 1 color of thread. And I'm using a size 5 pearl cotton threaded into a size 1 milliner's needle. It's important when you're making bullion stitch to use a nice long skinny needle, and a milliner's needle is perfect for that use. So let's start by making the center of the stitch. We're going to make 2 short bullion stitches, and I'm going to make these stitches using 5 wraps each. So first we'll just review how to make a bullion stitch. So we'll bring the thread up and go back down a stitch length away. This is about how long I want these little beginning stitches to be, and then come back up in that same hole, but don't pull through yet. We'll push the needle through just a little bit without pulling it all the way through. So now I'm going to wrap the needle, and for these beginning stitches I'm going to make 5 wrap bullion stitches. So we'll wrap the needle 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I always like to wrap the needle counterclockwise if I'm using a pearl cotton thread. Okay, and then kind of pinch those wraps so that they don't fall apart, and pull your thread through. Now, as you finish pulling through, you're going to use your pointer finger to keep wrapping those threads, and then organize that stitch onto your fabric, and then anchor it down at the beginning. Okay, so there's the first bullion stitch. Now we're going to make another short bullion stitch right next to that one. So again, go back in here. Don't pull through yet. We're going to do 5 wraps. Then pull the thread through your stitch. Keep the stitch organized with your finger like this, and then kind of organize the stitch onto the fabric with your thumb. Anchor the thread, anchor the stitch, and pull through. Okay, so there is your little flower center. So this is the flower center on this one. Now we're going to make the first round. Now if we look at this one, here is the first round is going to have 3 bullion stitches. 1, 2, 3, and they're going to overlap each other. So, but one is going to start out here a little bit so that stitch 3 can tuck into it. So this is stitch 1, then 2 overlaps 1, 3 overlaps 2, and tucks into stitch 1. Okay, so I'm going to do stitch 1 starting out here just a little bit so that the last stitch has room to tuck into that stitch. Now this stitch is going to have 10 wraps. So let's bring this stitch around to here. Okay, so the needle's going to come out here as before, but this stitch is going to have 10 wraps. So we'll do 10 wraps. You'll find yourself counting a lot when you're doing these bullion stitches. So pinch the threads, the stitches. Use your finger to guide those wraps around to keep your stitch nice and organized and tidy. And then anchor the stitch here where it first went in. pull through. Okay, so there is stitch 1, as I call it. Now stitch 2 is going to overlap stitch 1 slightly. Stitch 2 is going to start here, and let's bring stitch 2 around here. So I just have to turn my fabric so that I can get a hold of this stitch. Okay, again, we're going to do 10 wraps. 7, 8, 9, 10. If you do 9 wraps or 11 wraps, of course, it's not a disaster. So we'll pull the thread through those wraps. Use your finger to guide the wraps. Keep them under control. There is stitch 2. We'll anchor that one down. Okay, so there's stitch 1 and 2. Now stitch 3 is going to overlap stitch 2, and this stitch is going to then tuck right into stitch 1. Okay, so let's again do about 10 wraps. 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so stitch 3 is going to fit nicely under stitch 1. Okay, so now we have the first round. Now the second round is going to have 6 stitches. And again, you're going to come out here a little bit so that we'll have room for the last stitch to tuck into the first stitch. Now I call this first stitch in the second round 1B. Now let's look at these first stitches again. This is 1, 2, and 3. Each one of these stitches is going to have 2 stitches anchored onto it in the second round. So it's going to, but we're going to end with 1A. So we're going to start with 1B, as I call it. The stitch is going to come up here. It's going to anchor on to the second part, the second half of stitch 1. Okay, so I'm going to, again, in this round, these stitches are going to have 10 wraps also, just as they did in the first round. 10, there's 10 wraps. And we'll kind of organize that stitch down, and it is going to anchor on to the second part of stitch 1. Now the next 2 stitches are going to anchor onto stitch 2. This is stitch 2 right here. So we're going to overlap that one, that one that we just did. I called that 1B. Now we're going to make what I call 2A, because it's going to anchor onto the first part of stitch 2. So we've got to turn fabric a little bit just to get a hold of it. And now I'm going to do another bullion stitch. Okay, so this is, I call this 2A. Okay, because it's anchoring into the first part of stitch 2. All right. Now we're going to overlap that stitch And this next one is going to anchor on to the second part of stitch 2. Okay, so again it's going to have 10 wraps. 3, 4, 10. For a Bullion Rose, you need plenty of thread, so I started with a nice long piece of thread. Of course, if you run out of thread, it's pretty easy to change threads in the middle of this stitch. You just knot it on the back and then start your next thread. Okay, so that was, wait a minute, I've got to get this straight. Okay, so this is the first one. This is 1B. Here's 2A, 2B, because in the middle here is 1, 2, and 3. So these next 2 stitches are going to anchor onto stitch 3. Okay, so we're going to start by overlapping that 2B. This is going to be 3A because it's going to anchor onto the beginning of, onto the first half of stitch 3. So we're going to go 1, 2, 10 wraps. Guide your thread around. It wraps around, going to anchor onto the first part of stitch 3. Okay, now you probably have figured out that this next one is going to overlap that one, overlap stitch 3A, and this is going to be 3B because it's going to anchor onto the second half of stitch 3. And we'll do 10 wraps. Two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Anchor that stitch down. Now for the last stitch, we're going to overlap 3B, and I call this stitch 1A, which is going to tuck right underneath that first stitch we did, which I called 1B. Okay. And again, we're going to do 10 wraps. If you do 9 wraps or 11 wraps, of course, it's not a disaster. You won't notice. Okay, get that stitch organized. And tuck that stitch onto the first one. That's your last stitch. So there is a nice, tidy Bullion Rose.